Welcome to the Gestalt Get Together, presented by SpeechTherapyPD.com. Each episode has its own accompanying course on SpeechTherapyPD.com and is available for 0.1 ASHA CEUs. The Gestalt Get Together is your podcast for discussing the state of the evidence of Gestalt language processing, associated therapy modalities, and how our field is responding to the frameworks of GLP and NLA. I'm Corinne Zmoos, MS, CCC-SLP, a musical language therapist who's dedicated to celebrating while investigating Gestalt language processing, protecting the scientific method, and reducing cognitive linguistic biases about this framework and these clients that I love so much. My areas of focus are psychoacoustics, music theory, and musical syntax in GLPs. Previously, I worked closely with key players in the GLP quote-unquote movement, but experienced concerns with the propensity for logical fallacies and resistance to quantitative inquiry in the larger community. I now identify myself as lovingly skeptical, and I hope that listeners will sharpen their ability to recognize linguistic choices that move a cause forward without strong evidence, what level of evidence we're actually dealing with, and where we need to go next to support these kids that we care about. So what can you expect from us? Our episodes will provide balanced and educational interviews about clinician experiences, live coaching and problem solving about therapeutic decision making with a healthy dose of musical language recommendations thrown in, discussions on the logical fallacies and cognitive biases that emerge when implementing a new approach, and even some elements of the BITE model that have emerged within the larger GLP movement. Most importantly, this podcast is intended to help you embrace, investigate, and analyze your unique role in child development for Gestalt language processors without getting in your own way. This podcast is a celebration of neurodivergent learning, and we look forward to you learning with us along the way. Hey! Welcome back to the Gestalt Get Together, a mini-series for SpeechTherapyPD.com all about Gestalt language processing and natural language acquisition. In today's episode, I will be interviewing Hana Brouse, a speech-language pathologist from the Washington, D.C. area who works in early intervention through the parent and caregiver coaching model. Hana has experience learning about Gestalt language processing and natural language acquisition on the fly and implementing it in real time. Hana gives us perspective on what signs to look out for in the very young population to figure out if you might be working with a GLP. Hana also gives us insight about how to support families through this process in a way that is strengths-based, trauma-informed, and affirming of each family's personal journey. I want to hear a little bit about how you first got introduced to Gestalt language processing. Where did you hear about it? What did you think of it when it came into your life as a clinician?
I feel like it's cheating to tell the world that I learned about it from you, but it's the truth, right? You have been sort of a mentor figure in my life for a couple of years now in some really pivotal ways, but encountering both from you and then in my own Google searches and my own discussions with my grad school classmates, with other SLPs that I know, GLP just sort of crossed my path as something that was a new term, but also just made a lot of sense right off the bat for me. There was no long-term waiting period of, I don't know, this doesn't make sense. I don't really see this borne out. As soon as I was given the tools to sort of access and describe language in this way, I was like, oh, absolutely. Great. We have terms for that. Let's roll.
Where have you seen Gestalt processing in your work or even in your own life?
Oh my goodness, where haven't I? I had a housemate recently tell me, they were like, Hana, I think we have some guests coming for an upcoming trip. And she was like, Hana, I think maybe you should tone down how much we talk about like autism and Gestalt language processing for a little bit. Like maybe we talk about some other things. I've been diagnosed with ADHD, and the running gag is that if you're friends with me, the likelihood that you are also neurodivergent is incredibly high. So My friends and I are often still talking about how neurodivergence affects us. I have a lot of friends with adult diagnosed autism. But also, yeah, in my workplace, I mean, it's everywhere. I have about a decade of experience with autism, which feels intimidating to say at the ripe young age that I am. But the number of kids that I have, even in meetings this morning, it came up that, okay, let's look at how your kid is communicating. Let's see, what about this applies? What about this do we want to keep? What about this can we see reflected, and where could we go with that?
Okay. So I'm curious about, in your work, you're really going into other people's natural environments. You're not, in early intervention, we're not pulling to some like arbitrary clinic space that is like sanitized of all of like the flickers of real life. And so I want to hear more about when you meet a new kid or you start working with a new kid and their family, what are some of the things you look for to determine if they're an analytic language processor versus a Gestalt language processor? Because your kids are young. They're under 3 years old, usually.
Yeah. And I love that. Never met a toddler who's not shaped like my best friend. So I try to start right alongside the family's understanding, right?
Okay.
They're always going to be the expert on their own kid. And so if I can come along the family and or the caregivers and really see how they perceive their child, and then at the same time build an individual understanding of that child, that tends to be my starting point. So then I look for things like echolalia or scripting, right? These like classic terms we use for repetitive use of phrases, or use of phrases in ways that are maybe unexpected for what we call typical language development. And then from there, looking at, sort of the whole child and their behaviors and their interactions, but looking really closely at what they're imitating, how they're imitating it, where they're using it, and how the family is perceiving that. And from there, it's a really individualized plan for wherever the caregivers are at. There's never been a one size fits all for anything, especially language.
So in your work in early intervention, you're going into the natural environments, people's homes, daycares where kids are already existing and living and communicating. And so I'm wondering, what early signs do you look for in the under 3 population for Gestalt language processing?
It's interesting to consider, mostly because I forget that the children that are older than 3 look different. 0 to 3 is my bread and butter. But a lot of it is interactions with scripts, with melody, right? With music, with animal sounds, with how they communicate what they want. A lot of the kiddos that I would identify as Gestalt language processors are most engaged with their routines. They're most engaged with using songs and animal sounds to communicate. A lot of those really engaging intonations. What are the most exciting things that we're saying in the classroom, and which kids are latching on to that most specifically, and then using that to communicate throughout the rest of the day. In homes, it can look a little bit different because home life and routines in the home can be so variable. So with that, I come alongside a lot more family understanding, a lot more what things are parents most excited to hear their kids say, and what do they think is funniest? Because kids are just going to pick up the weirdest things. Adults are constantly saying odd phrases, and a lot of my little GLP kids are so excited about that. So one of the common gestalts that I hear is, "Mommy, what you doing?" And I've never not laughed about that with a parent, because it's so funny to hear coming out of a kid's mouth, "What you doing?" But it's such a nice, neat, it's so, the intonation, the prosody of that is so engaging. It's so curious. It always makes them laugh. So yeah, really looking at what routine phrases are we hearing outside of a routine, and why, which I think is really fun.
I love hearing about examples of scripts from kids, especially really young kids, because it gives us a window into what is really meaningful and having an impact on the brain. And, you're noting something really critical here, is that utterances with distinctive melodies and engaging intonation tend to stand out most to our GLPs. Ann Peters, one of the seminal researchers in this field, talked about how kids have to extract meaning from a running stream of speech. And their interpretation of a single unit may not perfectly line up with what we consider morphemes, because they're working really hard to pull it out. One of the most critical indicators of a unit is the silence that surrounds it. So it makes sense, we hear kids pull things out that have a lot of silence on either side, like, here we go. There's a clear, thick silence on either side of that. And then that intonation in the middle makes it really, really clear that, okay, this is important. It's during an important part of my day. It's related to something fun or exciting. And there it is. There's that perfect unit to pull out and replicate and bring to other places. So are there any other gestalts that have just like knocked your socks off you've heard from your clients?
I have a kiddo who he really likes using animals and their sounds.
Okay.
So we've got a lot of sheep, ba, ba, cow, moo, moo. Very engaging. And it stands out to me primarily because when I was working with their caregivers, right, I was talking about how these gestalts have meaning to them that we may not understand. They may have been created in a moment that we aren't associating the meaning with.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I was talking about the way that this child probably picked up that phrase, had import, had context for him that we needed to investigate. And so the way I had us do it, I was like, I want to see when and where he's using these.
Mm-hmm.
So I let them, we had this long conversation and let them go for a week. And when I came back, we had identified this pattern, and I figured it out because I asked them, I was like, well, he says sheep, ba, all the time. They looked me dead in the eyes and they're like, no, he doesn't. What do you mean? Every time I see this kid, it's all he says. And then we realized we each had an animal assigned to us. So when I walk in the room, he runs up to me and goes, sheep, ba, ba, because I was the one who sat and talked about the sheep the longest with him. I remember the day. I remember sitting down with him in these sheep figurines. And every time he said sheep, I said sheep, ba, ba.
Wow.
And I do feel a little bit ripped off because one of his teachers, she's shark.
That's cooler.
So I feel it is absolutely
objectively cooler.
But it was delightful to realize, to watch his caregivers suddenly understand that he had this map of meaning associated with these gestalts, that as soon as we started paying attention to the meaning he was conveying, suddenly his communication map just opened up to us.
Exactly. Hannah, you are touching some really important stuff about, hi, Romeo. My dog is also joining us for this episode. You're touching on something really critical in that a lot of GLPs in these early years are so drawn to connecting categories, and they're really drawn to categorical language. Farm animals are like so popular. Colors, shapes, rainbow order, planets, dinosaurs, these things that have a thick, almost like dinosaurs, there's plenty more we haven't discovered yet, but it's almost this fixed set of knowledge that there's a lot of redundancy in the world. I see the colors of the rainbow everywhere. I see this group of shapes on a lot of posters, the redundancy in it. And what you're speaking to is how these categories can then be exactly what you're saying, like this network of meaning where there's attachments and assignments and overlaps. And I very much think that this is connected to some form of synesthesia. I think in my own childhood, and I'm very curious about, where on the spectrum from analytic language to Gestalt language I am in my own childhood. I really have to do some digging, but I have synesthesia. And so every letter of the alphabet and every number has a color and a gender and a position in space, and there's a personality to it. It's all of this crossover of the qualities I see in my GLPs. Days of the week, months of the year have all of these sensory qualities that have been there my whole life. and I can associate letters with people. And what I'm hearing is a really cool example of this association of animals to people. And using this animal name and animal sound has become a way for him to connect with you. It's this shared song you have. And now that you guys know how to sing along, what has happened to him? How is he reacting now?
I mean, you can just watch him unfurl. It's like he's finally being understood, which enables him to then start using more language, right? We start seeing different animals crop up. Maybe some of our animals start crossing into other categories. It's this natural evolution of what recognition does, I think, right? Once you're actually understood, then you can start communicating more complex ideas.
Yes. This is something that we touched a little bit on in episode 1, which was the introductory course with Marge Blanc about stage 1. Stage 1 gestalts are this raw material that is pulled from the speech stream or pulled from the auditory stream of media, these big chunks. And once caregivers and people around the GLP recognize and validate and reflect back the chunks, a kid's brain just completely opens up and makes more growth possible. You know, my heart breaks for all the GLPs throughout all of history, even now, where their scripts that they have pulled from the speech stream with great talent and skill are either completely ignored or are stamped out, and you know, the people in their lives, particular therapists, try to extinguish them, not understanding that this is true, valid, meaningful, beautiful communication. So now that we've talked about some of these early signs of Gestalt language processors, the melody, the intonation, maybe hearing language in contexts that you wouldn't expect, as well as some categorical crossover or sensory crossover in language, I'd love to ground some of this in a real kid. So do you have a client, former or current, who embodies your work with GLPs and their families?
I have a couple. They're all near and dear to my heart, but I had a client this past year, particularly, that I saw this just change their entire family's life.
Okay.
The client's name is Zeke, name changed for protective purposes. So, but Zeke's family came to me with just some concerns about Zeke's delays in speaking words, in interacting with the family. They weren't really understanding much of what he was communicating. Felt sort of just stuck, especially in this pandemic world where interacting with other peers was difficult, understanding what other peers might be developing like was difficult. And I started, again, sort of like I was saying earlier, with that really grounded perspective of what are the caregivers seeing? What does their perspective look like? And also, outside of that, what can I see with this kid? What interactions are we having? And it's over Zoom, all of our sessions. And so that adds this whole other layer of distance between me and the family, even though it makes talking a little bit more direct, not always as distracted by a kiddo. It was a little bit harder to see into their world. So I really relied on talking to the caregivers. What do you see with Zeke? What does it look like? What does it make you feel? How can you understand it? And we built on ideas of noticing how much he loves letters and numbers. He's memorized the entire Russian alphabet off of YouTube. He loves it. If he can learn anything related to some sort of grapheme, he will. And so we dug into that. What does that mean? All these patterns he's finding. Why does he like that? The caregiver is sharing with me, it looks like he can read. Okay, let's dig into what does reading look like? What does reading really entail? Is he reading, or is he really seeking out the pattern prediction of letters? Is he memorizing words, or is he reading? And teasing that apart, watching them start digging into his own brain function, watching them start picking up the tools to go, okay, wait, what is he really doing? What is he really communicating? And then watching, I gave them the tool of contingent imitation, right? When we imitate a kid, it lights up all their neural pathways. It tells them, hey, I'm in your world. I can see you. I'm happy to be here.
What you're doing is important.
It's meaningful.
Yep.
even if you're not expressing complete understanding of their communication or their behavior, you're telling them that you're willing to be in that space with them, which really just, I mean, I feel like I could go off on that for forever with what it does for safety and brain development and language development. But once we started there, right, it was like he saw that we could see him, and he started expressing these like longer utterances more often. So then we got to dig into those utterances. So that's really interesting. He'll say a lot of, "Mommy, what you doing?"
Yeah.
He'll say a lot of repeating the Russian alphabet verbatim. He'll do a lot of repeating lines from television. And so we talked about these terms of echolalia and scripting, and talked about, what is he conveying? What is this connected to? What do you think this means for him?
Yeah.
So we did this work over, I'd say, 3 to 4 months.
Okay.
I see them twice a month. And at the end of 4 months is when I brought up the term Gestalt language processing. This is about the time that I was still learning about it, still digging into it. It's like, all right, okay, I think we're ready, let's go. And I watched Mom in that session really sit with it.
Okay.
And start connecting the dots for herself, and start going, wait, so this is the meaning. Oh, and this is why he's picking up this script. Okay, so when he picked this up off the television and then he used it for this context. And it was incredible to see that the groundwork we had been doing made sense for her.
Yeah.
But what really connected was, I think it was a couple months later, we had a session, and she came to me and she said, "Hey, I wanted to tell you, Zeke started saying a new phrase. He picked up a new gestalt. He came up to me and he said, 'Mommy, I have an idea.' And my response to Mom is, I wanted to say, 'What's the idea? What are we going to do? Show me.' And if I did that, he would just get quiet and run back away. And so I sat there and I went, no, Hannah and I have talked about this. I want to try imitating him. I want to try imitating him and telling him that I understand, or that I'm trying to understand." So the next time he ran up to her and said, "Mommy, I have an idea." She said, "You have an idea." And he stayed and made eye contact with her and laughed and ran away. And the next time he came up, she said, "Show me." And he took her to what he wanted to do.
Yeah.
And the next time he came up, she said, "I have an idea," and gave him ideas of what to do that they started doing together.
Yeah.
And she was like, "Hannah, I can see it. I can see what he's trying to tell me. And he may not have the words to tell me in the way that I'm going to understand, but I'm understanding him better.
Yep.
I'm able to follow his direction better." And what really got me was the way that she described it had so much confidence.
Yeah.
And so much, safety is a big word.
Mm-hmm.
But I think especially with kiddos who are presenting with a language delay or language disorder, or it's tied to different neurotypes, as parents, you kind of see this future ahead of you that is littered with fear.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many things that you can anticipate coming up against you and coming up against your precious child. And I think one of the biggest things that I encounter is when parents don't feel confident understanding their own child.
Yeah.
That fear is amplified because you don't know who is going to.
Yeah.
And it was in that moment, her description of how naturally it came to her. She's like, "We've been practicing this. I understood the theory behind this. I understood how his brain was working. So when this happened, I took a second, I reset, and I used tools that I knew were actually going to support him. And it felt natural and good for me."
Yeah.
And I just watched her look ahead at this future we've been talking about for Zeke this whole time, with none of the fear that used to be there. And that just felt amazing.
Wow. There's two things I want to talk about from that story. Is one of them is the difference in how she responded to someone out on the street, the difference between "what's the idea" and then what was the one that she came up with?
She
Have an
asked
idea.
me to show her, and that was inconsistently successful for her.
Yeah.
But just repeating it back to him.
Yeah. And so the language might sound similar to anybody like who isn't familiar. But what happened is we switched from a question to a statement.
Mm-hmm.
And so questions, we know, create communicative pressure. And sometimes questions can incite a little bit of fight or flight. I know for me, when I'm asked a question, I do feel physiological changes in me. But if I'm given a prompt or a statement, I feel much more confident answering it. And so not only is that the communicative pressure of the question, but she didn't answer back in a way that really mirrored his script. When she answered and responded in a way that better mirrored his script and the intonation, she was singing the same song as him. And then that click, the aha, you get me, you hear me. The other thing I want to note is that you're not keeping this knowledge to yourself. It really does make me so uncomfortable. And I think about the parts of our field where you pull a kid into a clinic room, you do therapy, and then you say, see you next week. That's just, it's not effective and it's not empowering. And it keeps a power dynamic going where the therapist knows all, the parent hopes for the best, and the kid better do a good job. And that's really violent. It's just not good community care. And we're leaving off a really important side of the EVP triangle, which is like how the community is benefiting, how the community is responding to it. And if you don't have families in there, you're not learning about that child's like full community response and how it's actually working for them. So you're bringing up how important coaching is when supporting Gestalt language processors. The word you used is perfect. And this is what Marge Blanc calls it, which is supports. You know, we're not hammering language into brains. We're not forcing kids through trial and check marks and programming to like get them to talk. It's about providing the right environmental and linguistic supports. So can you tell me a little bit more about how you coach families? How do you help them discover the underlying emotional meaning of Gestalts?
I am sitting with what you've said. I really love that. I so firmly believe I've never met a brain that can't learn. It's just about providing the right environment for it to do so, which just makes me so emotional to sit with.
Yeah.
I think when I tell parents, when I start with them, every time I give them a little background about me that I've given you today, and I tell them that I might have spent a significant chunk of my life studying language and becoming an expert in language development, but they are always going to be the experts on their child. I've never walked into a room and been the expert on a kid, and I probably never will. My knowledge is not for me. It is for me in that it makes me excited, it makes me a nuisance at parties. It's what I want to talk about. But that's for my joy, right? Community-centered care is coming alongside people who are going to be providing for maybe this one child, but maybe other children after them, maybe children down the hall, maybe want to recall their own childhood and have new understandings and tools for themselves. I think the miracle of early intervention is the coaching model. For whatever weaknesses it has, passing on knowledge to caregivers so that they can actually understand what's happening is what creates long-term change. If I can take a parent and sit them down and explain what is happening in their child's brain, what language means, why the tools I'm giving them are going to help their child in particular, it's going to generalize. Parents are going to provide, if I explain why the visual is helpful for circle time, parents are going to provide visuals for other routines. Hannah, what if we used a visual for lunch when my child needs to pick food? Absolutely. Teacher's going to be like, what if we had visuals for our schedule throughout the day so that they can understand what's happening? Absolutely. It's long-term effects of empowerment. You're giving parents the tools that are otherwise being kept from them, withheld behind paywalls of school and professional settings and insurance. You're giving them tools to actually understand their child and be able to fight for their child in future scenarios. And you're giving them the confidence of knowing that they can operate in their family structure without feeling terrified or lost.
Yeah. And what that does is it not just impacts that family that you're giving them the tools about how to support their Gestalt processor,
Yeah.
but then this knowledge and this advocacy you can watch it kind of ripple out slowly. I was just reading, one of my GLP clients went for an OT evaluation, like a really big OT evaluation. And in the communication section, I've always felt nervous when I read my kids' external reports that the communication section will be like, child uses vocal stereotypy and doesn't have functional language, which makes me want to like literally kick the walls down, because all language, all communication serves a function. And also like functional language, like the kid is not a toaster. They're already function. Like, it's just, I feel like the communication sections never quite get it. But I got this report back, and in the communication section, it said, mom shared that R is a Gestalt language processor. And that was in the report. It's now in writing. And now that occupational therapist is seeing him through a framework that truly sees him for his communication. And it wasn't like, oh, he's echolalic, he only speaks only just. The only isn't just. No, he is. He is a Gestalt language processor. He has beautiful scripts, and they serve the most important function, which is connection. I don't care if a kid like ever asks me for an apple by pointing at it, but if they can share a moment and connect and really be close with someone through language, that's the foundation for all other language. So I'm really excited about the coaching work that you're doing. I think that there's so much power in passing this knowledge on. What I really love about some of the people who are taking the lead in disseminating information about GLP, they make a lot of this stuff very accessible. So a lot of resources are free, or they are at a rate that's accessible to families and clinicians. I'll be attaching some of those to this talk today. But this is stuff where we want the community to understand their kids so that they can better provide those supports for them. And so it's really heartening. And it's why I wanted to invite you onto this mini series to hear about what it looks like on the ground. Instead of what I got in grad school was a lot of theory, but I wasn't really trained on how to then bring that to the people I'm serving, support them in learning it, not just learning what, but learning how. Because we can rattle off a million, terms and jargon, and we can overwhelm people in the classically paternalistic model where therapist and doctor know best. Or we can do what you're doing, which is co-creation. You're giving the knowledge through discussion, not through a monologue, and you are deciding as a team what to do, what to try. And there's no way we as a clinician who go in 60 minutes a week, and unfortunately our field is moving to 30 minutes a week because we have untimed codes, different story, is that we are able to pass on knowledge that can then be best used with people who know the full linguistic picture. I don't know what a script might refer to, but grandma does. I don't know what this particular script came from, but the babysitter knows it's from Daniel Tiger. The family has the full context for grounding these scripts and doing what you mentioned. I like the word you use, investigate. Another term for that is doing the detective work. Let's do some detective work behind the script and find out where it's from. What was the emotional imprint it made on the kid? And what is that underlying feeling of meaning? Not the referential analytical ball means ball, but does something about talking about a ball or a baseball game capture the joy of a baseball game? It's not necessarily that referential, this is a this, it's this is this.
Everything.
So much bigger.
I had a child who connected with a painting that we had in our clinic of a sun and a moon. It was abstract, it was very beautiful, and we were typically in a completely different room. But if he became dysregulated, he would come over to me and pull on my shirt and say, "Good night, moon." Oh. "Good night, moon."
Yep.
It had the word moon in it. And it took me a minute of really paying attention to him and following the lead to realize he's dysregulated, and he wanted to calm down by looking at this abstract piece of art that for him represented a day when we really bonded.
Yeah.
We really found grounding together. it was incredible. And once I found that connection, was able to make it with him, the way he held my face, I'm like, yeah, good night, moon, and looked at that painting with me. I'm ready. I'm here with you.
Wow. So to sum a lot of this up, because I know we're going to have people listening and doing this course who are working with young children, and they're wondering, what are some of the main signs I can look for? Because as clinicians, we're looking at so many things. We're trying to suss out a ton of different patterns while supporting families, while being in homes. There's a lot. And so right now, I think what we can do is start generating what are some of those early signs. And I'm going to make a list to attach as a download for the participants. But what are some of those early signs in very young kids that we might think, oh, they might be a Gestalt processor? So I'll start with one, is that kids who seem to sing way before they talk. That's a big one for me. If a family says, oh, I don't have any words yet, but they know every word to Wheels on the Bus, that's going to catch my attention.
I am going to play off with that. And kids who are going to sing their words when they do talk. Orange Bus. If you're getting some unexpected prosodic melody in there, that's a good sign for me.
I'm going to piggyback off of that. If the musical interval within that utterance is a big interval, those big intervals, when we talk, small intervals, Gestalt processors respond more to big intervals and often speak more in big intervals. I have a client who most of his stage 1 gestalts have an octave jump. An octave is a huge jump, like somewhere, da-da, can I go to the side yard? Can I go to the bathroom? There's so much movement in there. And if you're hearing big obstacles, if you're hearing big intervals like magnetiles, here we go, you might have a GLP on your caseload.
If they are eager to imitate, oh my gosh, what do we call them? If they are eager to imitate carrier phrases,
yes.
Can I go? Where are we?
This is
It's if you've got that phrase that can be filled in the blank, and that phrase is your best friend, great GLP indicator.
Probably because they love redundancy. And it's kind of like a pop song. Oh, how did I already memorize this pop song? It's probably really redundant. Easy to connect to. Oh my gosh, Hannah, I have this GLP. He still does it because we were almost in stage 3 and then something traumatic happened. And so he needed to come back to the safety of stages 1 and 2 again, which is a whole nother podcast. Oh my gosh. But his favorite carrier phrase was, shall we have snack? Shall we play with the letter B? Amazing. But exactly, those carrier phrases, they're redundant. They're safe. It's like asking, how's the weather? Like it's talking about the weather. It's that safety of having a soft, predictable place to land. And it just, and it's so funny about contractions. If you hear a kid using a ton of contractions to start sentences, they might be a GLP. It's so interesting. Good one. That's a really good one. One for me, a sign of a GLP is if they love categories of language. They know the farm animals, or they're lining up farm animals, or rainbow order. If I see a kid putting things in rainbow order, I am like, you are probably a GLP and we're going to be best friends. Dinosaurs. I had a really young GLP who knew every president. He loved the presidents.
Couldn't be me.
I don't know if I love any of them. I'm going to get in trouble for that one. But looking for patterned knowledge, or your kiddo with the Russian alphabet. It's actually interesting. There's a lot of GLPs who are non-Russian speakers who love Russian. Any ideas why?
Interesting. Is it Cyrillic languages or more melodic?
Super melodic, and also the consonant combinations that happen there are just so enticing.
Oh, delicious.
Right?
Yeah.
So, and I think
there's
a lot of exciting research that needs to be done about GLPs and other languages. There's been some cool stuff about tonal languages and pitch processing. We don't have time to get into today. But kids who are drawn to other languages, even if they've barely had exposure to them, or they don't have, like a robust language model. So another one is kids who seem to pull a lot more language from pre-recorded audio or digitized speech. That's a sign, because that language is very redundant too. Every time I say something, it's a little bit acoustically different. But every time someone on Daniel Tiger says something, it is exactly acoustically the same. It is so much easier to learn from it because it is acoustically redundant. It's acoustically a match. And that means it's predictable. Whereas I say gorilla, you say gorilla, someone else says gorilla, we can split the difference that those are the same words. Can a GLP? It might be a lot harder.
Another one is if they have enough language to carry a conversation with you, but they're not consistently responding to your topic. I might initiate a conversation with a kid. The parents are like, they have a lot of language. They have whole phrases. They're communicating at the sentence level. Fantastic. If I initiate a topic about a phone routine, oh, ring, ring, hello, who's there? But their responses are just slightly off topic. Maybe they say, hello, it's the doctor. We're going to the doctor. Hi, mommy. And there's nothing else. Yeah. Or maybe they just change the play routine completely. It sounds like maybe they have the language for a lot of ideas, but they don't have the exact gestalts to respond to this interaction just yet.
Yep. Because they haven't moved through the stages enough to flexibly recombine their units. They're at stage 1 or stage 2 where they need to pull from this toolbox where the chunks are really big. I think the last one I want to note is that a lot of our kids are pretty unintelligible from birth to 3, not just because developmentally they don't have all the sounds, but because a lot of our GLPs who are autistic have motor speech differences. It's really hard to carry out the praxis of complex verbal speech. And so the last one I'll let you know about is, or bring your attention to, is if you hear that jargon, those prosodic curves, and they seem to be the same every time, you're probably dealing with a GLP. You might not understand the words, but if that chunk is consistent, keep listening to it, and it's probably going to click if you do enough detective work that is from some show they love, or that is what the metro train says every time they take the train. If you keep listening to that, you'll realize that is please move to the center of the car. You can tell I'm a DC girl. I know. And so that's another sign, if you're not hearing true, crisp, clear words yet, if that melody or the song is the same every time, you're probably working with a GLP who needs very different supports than the analytic language processors on your caseload. So those are some things to look out for. Once you know what you're looking for, you will never unhear it and you'll never unsee it. And it is such a gift to be able to give the right kind of therapy and the right kind of support to these kids. As we know, a lot of kids, they are not identified at early intervention as GLP, and they end up on our caseloads in school, middle school, high school, even in their early 20s, and haven't been given those supports. And all they have is the rote language that's been drilled into them inappropriately. And what we do and what Hannah's doing every day is supporting families much earlier so that kids can naturally move through the stages with the right support. So Hannah, thank you so much for what you're doing.
Yeah, happy to do it.
Now, please be advised, and this is important. This screener is not a diagnostic tool for 3 reasons. The first reason is that this is not a comprehensive list. Gestalt language processors present with many other signs, similarities, and strengths that were not able to be included on this screener. This screener is primarily directed towards very young children under 3 years old, and due to my areas of specialization, are mostly focused on the musical qualities. The second reason why this is not a diagnostic tool is because it has not gone through any rigorous testing for validity, reliability, and has not been peer reviewed. The third reason that this is not a diagnostic tool is because Gestalt processing is not a disorder. Keep these things in mind as you're using this tool, and remember, it is just a tool. And you as a speech pathologist have a big toolbox. Use it alongside your other tools and your clinical judgment to help inform your decision making. Now that all those disclaimers are out of the way, let's go through some of the main signs that I see in young Gestalt processors, but also many of my older ones as well. Number 1, your child or client can sing songs, but may not speak words. This is a common sign that I see in young GLPs. Parents are often so confused and curious. Why can my kid clearly sing Wheels on the Bus, but they don't say mama yet? This is something that we're going to continue to explore in other episodes, but I want to give you some teasers about why this might be. The first reason is that spoken language often doesn't have the same kind of prosodic contours, those really rich intonational contours that music does. Another reason is that when we sing songs or hear sung language, the vowels are longer and very often the consonants are longer too. A third reason is that music inherently has pauses on either side of the big chunks. The silence before a song starts and the silence at the end of the song helps a GLP clearly understand that this is a chunk of meaning. When a GLP hears the endless speech stream of a teacher or parent, it's harder to pick out where the chunks are that are demarcated by silence on either side. A fourth possible contributing reason is that musical language or language embedded in music is processed by different pathways than spoken language is on its own. Now, music and language have many overlapping pathways in the brain that use a lot of recruitment and resource sharing. But music also has different pathways that are more strongly accessed by GLPs who are more skilled at analyzing and tracking perceptual information. They aren't as skilled or aren't as able to notice the semantic level of information. Instead, the perceptual information of pitch, rhythm, meter, and melody stand out much more to them. These are some reasons why kids are able to sing these songs so impressively, but may not yet be connecting with spoken words that we model. The next sign is that this child uses melodic or musical speech patterns. Gestalt language processors are drawn to melody. Melody is pleasing to their brains, and they're able to process and analyze all of the perceptual level information within them. These melodic or musical speech patterns are often ways of more saliently connecting to meaning. The meaning is rooted in emotion and experience rather than those higher level semantic cues that grammar has. Here's another one I want you to keep an ear out for. GLPs often speak with melodies that have large pitch intervals. What does this mean? So, a melody is something you may be familiar with. That is the tune of a song. A GLP may speak with a melody that has big jumps in pitch. An interval is the distance between two pitches. Let me give you an example from one of the clients who helped me start to find the connections between music theory and GLP. My client would speak in the following way. Can we go outside? Time to go to the bathroom. Now, if you weren't able to catch how big those jumps and slides were, I encourage you to rewind and listen again a couple more times. Try using your hand to track the movement of my pitch in my speech as I say it. Watch how your hand rises and falls higher and lower than it might go for if you tracked your own speech patterns. For example, if I was not modeling for a GLP, I might say, "It's time to go to the bathroom." Those are small to moderate pitch intervals. But if I say, "It's time to go to the bathroom," those are big jumps. Gestalt language processors often speak with these big pitch intervals, and this is often a clue to me for a new client or a colleague's client who I'm helping with mentorship that we have a GLP on our hands. Our next early sign is that GLPs are often eager to imitate common carrier phrases. What is a carrier phrase? When we think about carrier phrases with analytic language processors, we think of things like, "It's time to," or "Here we go." We also think of things like "ready, set." Anything that has momentum towards a final word or final set of words, and anything that is easily mixed and matched at the end can be considered a carrier phrase. 1, 2, 3. You could put any verb at the end of that. "It's time to." You could put any verb or name of a routine at the end of that one. "Let's go to the." You could put so many words at the end of that. "I see ya." You could put an animal at the end, color, person. These are carrier phrases. Gestalt language processors are drawn to carrier phrases because they are redundant. Think about it. GLPs are often immersed in a speech stream from caregivers who are so well-meaning, but do not provide enough redundancy of language for GLPs to pick up on the patterns of spoken language. This makes it hard for them to notice what is meaningful and what is not. When we add this to how GLPs are much more skilled at perceptual information like pitch, rhythm, and meter, rather than semantic referential information like pointing and naming dog, tree, it makes sense that the carrier phrases, with all their redundancy and all their predictability, are really compelling for GLP ears and brains. When a GLP hears, "I see a dog," "I see a frog," "I see a house," they're able to go, "Oh, I see ya," and pick up on that pattern, and then hopefully start to use it themselves. Now let's go a little bit deeper on this. Often with carrier phrases that GLPs are drawn to, they start with contractions. GLPs who are speaking often start sentences with words like "let's," "it's," "I'm." Why is this? These are words that are often found in the initial position of utterances, which helps with redundancy. I'm also curious about how many of them have high-frequency sound combinations, which can capture the ear. Let's, TS, very high frequency. It's, very high frequency. These are the two I hear most often. And I'm curious, because of the very noticeable perceptual information of utterances that begin with something that has tss, do GLPs pay more attention? When you combine this with the fact that many carrier phrases start with let's and it's, we're creating the redundancy and the mix and matchability that GLPs thrive in when they're trying to pick up gestalts. The next one is one that you may be familiar with. Many GLPs love categories, especially categories of language. Think about it. If you were learning a new language, you would probably be drawn to categories of information too, because you're able to draw a cognitive barrier around them. When we have a cognitive barrier around a set of information, this acts as a framework. it makes these concepts or words easier to remember because they are related to each other. GLPs are drawn to categories for this reason. Think of many of the autistic children you serve who love dinosaurs. This is a category that feels satisfying because information fits within it in a neat and predictable way. GLPs notice the differences in perceptual features between the items in a category, and this feels really satisfying. Comparing the visual symbology of the letter A versus the letter J, or the jagged front of a triceratops versus the jagged back of a stegosaurus. If you have a kiddo who particularly loves categories of language like farm animals and shapes, but doesn't seem to have a lot of core words or typical early first words, they might be a GLP. Another thing I see in GLPs often is lining items up, especially if they're lining them up in size order, rainbow order, or in a similar or the same order every time. I work with a GLP who loves the little vehicles I have, and he will always line them up white, red, blue, purple, white. To me, I don't perceive a pattern in there that's meaningful to my brain, but he definitely does. And for that reason, it has become meaningful to me. Now, lining things up has sadly become quite pathologized and not seen as a valuable form of play for autistic kiddos and GLPs. It is the view of NLA clinicians and myself that this is an opportunity and a window for connection. Think about it. Gestalt processors love perceptual information. They are skilled at it. They are collectors of perceptual data like melody, pitch, as well as visual features. Lining things up is a method of comparison. It is a way to notice the small details in the world. And to me, it shows a pretty cool scientific method for a very tiny human. If you have a kid who lines things up and looks at them very carefully, especially if they're trying to figure out an order, you might have a GLP on your caseload. Here's one that tickles me to no end. GLPs are really drawn to foreign languages and accents. If you have a kid on your caseload who, for some reason, watches videos in Russian or keeps finding the YouTube video of someone speaking with a British accent, start to pay attention to some of the other GLP qualities they may be showing. Many of my clients are drawn to Hindu, Russian, Slavic, and other languages that have really noticeable melodic contours and interesting consonant combinations. I also have clients who are drawn to other accents, including one who insists that I speak in a British accent during our sessions. And man, oh man, does he acquire language from me when I say it in a British accent. Our next quality of a GLP is that they seem to learn language more easily from videos, music, and books than quote unquote regular speech. Now, why could this be? My theory is that it is paired with salient visual information, but also when we listen to speech and language from a video or from a source material that is musical, the acoustic properties are the same every single time. However, when a human in their life says something, even if they say it over and over again, the acoustic properties shift ever so slightly at every time. This gets rid of some elements of redundancy, which can make it hard for a GLP to process, acquire, and replicate that language. But the acoustic signals from media are exactly the same every time, unless the volume has been turned up or down. Hana shared an early sign from their caseload, and this is one that we see in children who are speaking, but show signs of being a GLP. These children respond to your questions or prompts either completely off topic or just slightly off topic. If you really dig deep into their answers, you'll start to notice that this child may have taken in a Gestalt understanding of what you said. Maybe they heard a key word that they knew, or maybe they were responding to your intonational contour rather than analyzing every single word and how it related to the other words. Listen closely to kids who seem to respond off topic or slightly off topic, even if they're listening to you with rapt attention. They may be responding more to the perceptual qualities than the semantics. The next one is a child who speaks to you unintelligibly, whether that sounds like babbling, jargon, but the underlying melody and prosody seems recognizable to you. You may not be able to place where the string is from, but it seems familiar. You may also be able to place it and realize, oh, that's the song from the video that they love and they watch every morning during breakfast. For many of our GLPs who happen to be autistic and also happen to have motor speech differences, intelligibility is going to be a concern for quite a while. Here's the thing. Even if we can't understand a spoken Gestalt, it is still a Gestalt. In that GLP's head, it is rich, meaningful, and they want you to acknowledge it. Here's another sign. GLPs often like to play in the same way every time, and they seem to reenact scenes, either from movies or lived experiences. One of the first GLPs I ever worked with loved to dress up as certain Halloween characters and would do the same motions and sounds every single time. Now, her parents weren't quite sure if she fit the GLP description because she made deep, abiding eye contact, and she was acting out and doing lots of pretend play. Here is how we distinguish between pretend play that's more generative and the pretend play of a GLP. First, are they pulling each of the motions and the sounds from a source that they have watched in the past? And second, does the momentum of the play or the steps of that play look exactly the same every time? They may even want you to act out a role the same way every time and become distressed if you go, quote, off script, unquote. Notice the qualities of this pretend play. Is the child able to add something different on their own? Do they go off script? If not, they may have a gestalt of that scene that they watched, and they are living it over in their head with you. Another sign is that a GLP watches videos or listens to music repeatedly. You may also see this GLP rewind and replay certain parts of it over and over again. One of those most magical things is when something's going on in their life and they search for a particular video, find a particular spot in that video, and then the snippet they play perfectly relates to the situation. This is also something we see in GLPs, and it gives us into a window of just how much they understand and how much they want to express to us and communicate to us. Here's one that cracks me up as a musician. GLPs, especially those that have something that's called perfect pitch, can get upset when they hear music that is slightly off key. Many analytic processors are totally fine when their parents sing to them, even if their parents don't have the nicest of voices. For many GLPs that I work with, they cannot tolerate their family singing or even humming. This is because Gestalt processors who have perfect pitch or who are particularly sensitive to auditory information, which many GLPs are, hearing things go even a few cents, we measure pitch in cents, even a few cents off key can be really painful to listen to or create deep discomfort. If you have a kid who loves the recording of Wheels on the Bus, but can't stand it when they sing it at daycare, start to look for other signs that they might be a GLP. Here are a couple that are really adorable, and you're only going to get these from a great parent interview or coaching relationship. GLPs will often babble and practice their scripts before falling asleep and waking up. Families will report hearing musical talking in the early hours in the morning and in the late hours of night. They will sometimes describe this as their child practicing talking. This is a great time to probe to see if they've heard any patterns in the musicality, the rhythm, or the order in which they practice these scripts. And finally, another sign of GLPs is that these kids often speak in the third person, using their own name instead of I or me. This is because many American parents will speak in the third person about themselves and their child, like, Sally wants to go down the slide while speaking to Sally. They'll also say things like, Mommy isn't ready to go yet, or Daddy's coming home soon. Speaking about people who are present, and actually that wasn't a good example of Daddy. Daddy sitting on the couch is more appropriate. In these early years, many American parents speak to children in the third person to them about them. For GLPs, they will pick up on these chunks of information and start to use them themselves. Speaking in the third person is something we see across many children, regardless of processing type. But if we see this persisting past the point when we would expect personal pronouns to emerge, it may be a sign of a GLP. So, this is your resource. It's a jumping off point, and once again, it is not a diagnostic tool. But I hope that it can help you start to organize your thoughts and begin to identify and support the GLPs in your caseload and in your life. Thanks so much for joining us on today's podcast. Remember to go to speechtherapypd.com to learn more about earning ASHA CEUs. We want you to get credit for the hard work you've put in to further your education. We also appreciate your support. We'd love for you to write a quick review of the podcast and subscribe. If you're listening on a streaming platform, feel free to rate us. 5 stars is great, 4 stars is awesome, but we also appreciate honesty around here if it's lower. That way, your ratings and your reviews will help get our podcast to more clinicians like you, as well as parents and people from other professions who might benefit from learning about Gestalt language processing. Now, if you've indicated that you are part of the ASHA registry and entered both your ASHA number and a complete address in your account profile prior to the course completion, we will submit earned CEUs to ASHA for you. Please allow 1 to 2 months from the completion date for your CEUs to be reflected on your ASHA transcript. And also, please don't hesitate to tell us which topics you would like us to cover in future episodes. To get in touch, drop us a line in the comments section or send us a message on social media. We'd love to hear who you want us to interview, what topics are on your mind, and where you'd like us to investigate when it comes to the world of GLP. Okay, but here's the really cool part, especially because you listened all the way to the end. For our Gestalt Get-Together listeners, we actually have a special coupon code to receive $20 off any annual subscription to speechtherapypd.com. Head over there to get ASHA CEUs for listening to this podcast and all other episodes. My code is Gestalt20. You're going to put Gestalt in all caps, and that is GESTALT 20. I hope to see you at our next episode.